In this video we're going to look at the forms for the Beach Survey database. This is part B of the exam and it's taken on a separate data part A, and you're given a database to work on or to create your forms for. Let's have a look. You're given a task scenario as well. So Get Our Beaches Clean has partially developed a database that will eventually be merged with the database that you created in part A. The organisation relies on donations from the general public to publicise the cleaning campaigns, provide transport and cleaning materials. Donors are given a status of bronze, silver, gold or platinum. Bronze status is for those whose total donations are below £26. Silver status is for those whose total donations are from £26 to £50. Gold status is for those whose total donations are from £51 to £75, and platinum status is for those whose total donations are over £75. There's always a note with the Part B. Note, the structure of the tables provided should not be changed in any way. For example, do not add validation, do not change data types. So they're talking about changing the actual tables there. You will only be required to use TBL donor and TBL donation. And you'll be able to see when you open the database, there's actually a lot more tables in the database than just TBL donor and TBL donation. The first form on the paper will ask you to create an input form to add data to a table. So let's have a look at form 1. Create an efficient interface that will facilitate database input by producing 1. An input form to add a donor. The form should be ready for data entry. The donor's surname and email address must be present. The donor's email address must use the valid format. Valid data should be appended to the donor table and a save message should be displayed. A suitable error message should appear where invalid data has been used. Let's just have a quick look at TBL donor. It's got donor ID, donor surname, donor email address and status. And if we just have a look at this in design view, we can see that donor ID is auto number, so the user's not going to be entering the donor ID. So we're now ready to create the form. We'll click on create and we can use the form wizard, and we're going to base the form on TBL donor, and we need all the fields selected for the form. We can leave it columnar and always give a title and prefix it with FRM. And then finish. And you can see here we've got a very basic form. We're going to make quite a lot of changes to it in terms of formatting, and then we're going to provide some validation that's activated when we click on a button. The first thing I'm going to do is make some changes to the form. I'm going to make it a data entry form. I'm going to turn the scroll bars off, turn the record selectors off and turn off the navigation buttons, and I'll do some formatting while I'm here before I actually start making any changes to any of the fields or putting on the button. So we're in design view now and I've got the form being the selected, and this is where I'm going to make changes to the actual form. Just going to pop these into alphabetical order. I just find it a bit easy when I'm searching for things. If we click on all, down we've got data entry. We're going to turn that to yes. Then we've got record selectors, no. Scroll bars, neither. Navigation buttons, no. Just do some general formatting now, things like the heading, the colour of the form header and the labels to make those more user friendly. In terms of column formatting features, I'm going to use similar ones to the report that are created in Part A. The examiner is looking for use of a house style, so it's a good idea to go into this exam with an idea in the head about what features and colours, font sizes for example, you're going to use. The next thing I'm going to do is disable the donor ID control. because the user should not be allowed to enter anything into the donor ID. It's an auto number field. So we do this with enabled and turn that to no. And you can see it's greyed it out, which shows that the user can't enter the donor ID. Quick look at what we've got so far. We've got a suitable title, some instruction to the user. We've got the fields which are nicely placed across the width of the form, labels for the user to read rather than just field names. And then I've put on or indicated where data entry is required. In the scenario, it doesn't say anything about status, it's just a field in the table, but there's no validation or anything on it. The next thing to do is to draw on the button and create the macro to validate the data entry. The next stage is to create the macro now. So right click on the button and just pull this down a bit so you can see build event. If it comes up with the next record, just click on it and delete what's there, and then you're ready to start afresh with your macro. The first thing to check is that the donor surname is present, so we're going to use an if and is null. Donor surname, don't forget to close the bracket. If that is null, we need a message box. Donor surname must be entered, and have a standard title to your message box. Then we add an else if, and then we're going to do a similar thing to check that the donor email address is present. The next thing we need to check for is that the donor email address is in the correct format. So we add another else if. Okay, so what we're saying is if the donor email address is not like, and then in quotes, we've got the format of the email address. So it's going to asterisk that represents any number of characters. We've got a question mark, which means you've got to enter at least one character or a number. Then the @ sign, and then the user's got to enter a character or a number represented by the question mark, and the asterisk, any number of characters, and a full stop, and the question mark represents at least one character or number, then the asterisk, any number of characters or numbers. And if that's not true, then we need to have a message box. We've completed all our checks now in the validation to make sure the donor surname is present, the email address is present, that the email address is in the correct format. The last thing we need to do is add an else, and if all those are true, or if they're all fine, there's no problems, we need to save the record. And we're going to add a message box. We also need to add something that will force it onto blank record when we've saved the record. We can do this with go to record, and just check that it says record next, and I don't think we need to add a message. So let's save our macro. At this point, we'll check the syntax of all the statements in the macro. It may come up with an error if the syntax isn't correct, so you just need to go back and make some changes. Close. Now we're in form view. It's just a case of just checking to make sure everything works correctly. So let's try saving a record without a donor surname. The surname must be entered, that's fine. Let's try saving it with the email address in the incorrect format. I'll put a full stop in instead of the @ that's fine. Let's try saving it with that. Okay, so when I click on save now, it should save the record and display the message, say the record saving. That's the first form complete. We'll now have a look at the second form. This is form 2. It's also classed or called an input form, but you're not actually saving anything to your tables with this form. So the form should not include validation for any fields. The form should not include an automated routine to save the data. The form should include a button labelled Update Donor Record. Donation date should be automatically set to today's date. The user should be able to select the donor. The donor status should be displayed on the form. Total donations made by the donor should be displayed on the form. The user should be able to input a donation amount. When the user clicks the Update Donor Record button, an updated total donations should be displayed on the form or in the message box. An updated donor status should be displayed on the form or in a message box, e.g. change from bronze to silver. But we're now in Access. I'm going to create, and this time I'm going to use form design. I'm going to put on all the controls first and do some formatting, and then we will deal with the actual calculations and updating the donor record with the status, etc. Just remember, this isn't a form that's going to be updating, it's not going to be saving. It's just literally the user putting things in on the form and a button to come back with the status. Let's put on a title. Just put on the instructions to the user as well. And now put on all the other controls. I've got now my basic form with all the controls on, and I've carried out some formatting, obviously using similar formatting features that I've used before to fit in with the house style that I've got. So the next thing I'm going to do is just name some of these controls, because I'm going to be using them or referring to them either a macro or in some calculations. So this control here I'm going to call CBO because it's going to be a combo box. So I'll call it CBO donor ID. This one I'm going to call TXT total donations. The next one I'm going to call TXT enter donation amount, and TXT updated total donations. So now I can start dealing with some of these controls. The donation date needs to be equal to the current date of the system. So I'm going to put this the default value as it. And every time we go to a form, it should have the current date in. The next one is the donor ID. I'm going to do a right mouse click on that, and I'm going to change it to a combo box. And if I go into the resource, and let's just put the table in for the TBL donor, close that down. I want the donor ID, and I'm going to put the donor surname in as well, and close. Just while we're here on this, I'll need to change the format of this. I've only got one column wide. I'm going to change that into 2 columns to accommodate the ID and the surname. And the widths I'll put in as 0.5 and 3.5. And that should be wide enough for the name and the donor ID. Also on this donor ID, I'm just going to do a requery as well. Build event. Macro builder, requery, save and close. I want the total donations, and we're going to use dsum for this. And the property sheet on the data tab, control source, build. So the first thing we have to tell it to add up is the actual field in the table. So that's donation amount. Then we tell it which table we want to find that in. And then we tell it what we're matching with. So whatever's in CBO donor ID, want it to go and match with the donor ID in the table. Just recap on that. dsum, donation amount, so that's a field I want you to go and look at and add up. Then a comma, and then we're looking in TBL donation, then a comma. And it's going to match whatever's in CBO donor ID, go and match with donor ID on the table and add up those donation amounts. Just inform you here, I'm selecting a donor, and you can see the total donation amounts are changing. We now want the current status. We can use a dlookup for this. So into the data, control source build. This is in TBL donor. Again, we match them, whatever's in donor ID, we're going to go and match with in this table. Quick recap, do a big dlookup, looking status in TBL donor, the match between CBO, donor ID and donor ID in the table. And you can see here we're now back in form view. I've selected a donor ID. The current status is gold. If I select another one, you see it's changed to platinum. Next thing I'm going to do is this updated total donations control. I'm going to work out the updated total donations. This is going to be a calculation for adding enter donation amount, total donations. So if we go on data, control source and build. So it's enter donation amount plus TXT total donations. I'm now in form view. For this donor, we've got total donations of 106. We've added a donation of 10. Therefore, the updated total donation is 116. A couple of things here. I need to disable those controls that the user is not going to enter any data, and I need to format total donations, enter total donation amount and updated total donations to currency. Enable to no. Now set the fields to currency that require it. Just check on the form view again. You see the greyed out controls. Ones that are empty are not greyed out, are where the user's going to either make selections or make an entry. Looking better now, we've got a currency and we've got the greyed out controls. I'm just going to put on where data input's required on the form. So we draw the button on now. Draw button on, cancel, because we don't want any of those actions. We've got our button and click off the button. If we do a right mouse click now and go to, let me pull this down a bit, go to build event and a macro builder and OK. So the first thing we want is an if. What we're going to do here is check if the updated donation total, if it's less than 26, the donor status is bronze. We'll use a message box. Then we've got an else if. We're going through the same check. This time, is it less than £51? If it is, we'll display a message box. And this time the donor status is over. With the next, we can put on another else if. Again, we're checking that TXT updated total donations. If it's less than 76, we need a message box. And this time the donor status is gold. And then at the end, we don't want another else if, we just need another else, because if none of those are true, there must be platinum. So add else. And here we just want a message box. And in the message box, we're going to say, oh, that's it. So just a quick recap. Start with an if. We check TXT updated total donations. Less than 26, then the donor status is bronze. Got an else if. We're checking that TXT updated total donations again. This time, if it's less than 51, donor status is silver. Got another else if. Looking at TXT updated total donations. Is that less than 76? If it is, then the donor status is gold. Wise. The donor status must be platinum. Okay, make sure you save. At this point, again, it may come up with some syntax errors. You need to go through and correct them. And the flows. And let's go to our form now and just test it. So for this donation, previous total donations were 73. Previous donor status was gold. There were £10. Updated donations are now 83, which means the donor status is platinum. This donation, the previous donations were 45 and the status was silver. We've had £10, total donations are now 55, therefore they're greater than 51, so therefore it must be a gold status, because it's over 51 but less than 76. Here we have a donation, the total donations are 45, £2, updated donations are 47. I've updated the status, it was silver before, it's still silver because it's not gone over 51. We've got just one more check. I've added a donation for a donor 55 at the end just to check the bronze. Previous donations were £2, there was no status, and we've added £2, which is a £4 updated total donation, and because that's less than £26, then the donor status is bronze. And just to finish this off, I've put a little bit more formatting to make the form look like my previous one by adding the 2 lines. So that completes the forms now for the Beach Survey database. Next thing is to evidence testing the forms.